Hello everyone, welcome to Lit Studio by Karishma. Today's topic would be Cleanth Brooks. He is also a very integral part of new criticism. Earlier we have discussed most prominent figures of new criticism like I.A. Richards, William Emerson. So I request you to watch the videos and then come back to this video so that you can understand the entire concept in a much better sense. Now let's dive right into the video. So about Cleanth Brooks, first and foremost thing, we all know that he's a main prominent of new criticism. The very important book of Cleanth Brooks. First of all, when you hear the name of Cleanth Brooks, you should be very much directed towards Well-Wrought Urn, all right? That's a very important book, okay? The title of the book, Well-Wrought Urn, was taken from John Donne's canonization. And then Well-Wrought Urn is subtitled Studies in the Structure of Poetry. All right, it was published in the year 1947. You can also remember this as the date is our independence, the year of our independence. So yeah, Well-Wrought Urn is his first and very, very important book. All right, Cleanth Brooks has written it. And then he wrote two other books along with Robert Penn Warren. Robert Penn Warren is also a very important figure in new criticism. We would be discussing about him in the next video. What are the two books that he wrote along with Robert Penn Warren are Understanding Poetry and Understanding Fiction. Understanding Poetry was written in the year 1938. All right. So there are other books written by him as well. Those are Modern Poetry and Tradition. It was written in the year 1939. If you see these four books, the top four books, Well-Wrought Urn, Understanding Poetry, Understanding Fiction, Modern Poetry and Tradition, all these four books are very important in NET point of view. They will not be asking any questions related to what are the concepts that Cleanth Brooks has discussed in these books, but they will very much be asking about the book and the writer. And also, if we take the book Understanding Poetry and Understanding Fiction, they might ask questions like who Cleanth Brooks has written these particular books along with which writer. See, I.A. Richards has written few books along with C.K. Ogden. So Cleanth Brooks has written certain books along with Robert Penn Warren. We must remember that, all right? So yeah, the other books are Language of Paradox. Paradox is a very important concept that Robert Penn Warren, Cleanth Brooks has given, and we would be discussing it in detail in his terms. And the other work would be Keith Sylvian Historian, History Without Footnotes. All right. So if you also observe, Keats has written the book Ode to Grecian Urn. And one can also argue that the title Well-Wrought Urn is also inspired from this as well, but the title has been taken from John Donne's canonization. They might ask this kind of questions as well, so we must be prepared for that as well. So now that we are done with the books, I would suggest you to take another look into them. They are Well-Wrought Urn, Understanding Poetry, Understanding Fiction, Modern Poetry and Tradition, Language of Paradox, Keith Sylvian Historian. The subtitle of Well-Wrought Urn is Studies in the Structure of Poetry, and it was written in the year 1947. And I stress it upon you that you must remember every detail related to Well-Wrought Urn, the year it was published and the subtitle of it and the title where it was taken from. Alright, so now we are completely done with the books, and then let's get into the concepts. There are two important concepts given by Cleanth Brooks. Number one is paradox, and number two would be Heresy of paraphrase. I would be discussing heresy of paraphrase later. Let's discuss paradox first. So what do you understand about paradox? Paradox is when a statement talks about two opposite meanings in itself, all right? So if a statement says, see, I always lie, all right? Example, I always lie. So if I'm saying I always lie, so saying that I always lie should also be a lie. So does that mean I never lie? So that is the kind of paradox. It is contradicting itself, all right? We have two opposite meanings in a same sentence. Got it? So as I've mentioned before, the idea of paradox was discussed in his book, The Language of Paradox. All right? In The Language of Paradox, Cleanth Brooks says paradox is the language appropriate to poetry. why does he say that? For example, if you watch the previous video by William Empson, he has discussed about 7 types of ambiguity, and he also emphasizes on the fact that ambiguity adds depth to the poetry. Ambiguity gives an understanding towards poetry in a much better sense. All these kinds of ambiguity, all the 7 kinds of ambiguity that he discusses, he says that if the reader understands all these 7 types of ambiguity, he understands the depth of the poetry in a much better sense. All right. In fact, that is somehow related to this concept as well. He says that paradox is a language appropriate to poetry. All right. He says that poetry becomes much more appealing when paradox is used. All right. Cleanth Brooks says it is paradox which is the language of poetry and it is inevitable to poetry. Okay, these are the exact lines he says. Cleanth Brooks says it is paradox which is the language of poetry. He says that language of poetry is paradox, and also it is very inevitable to poetry. Even when one doesn't want to use paradox, one must use paradox to kind of increase the depth or increase the multi-layered meaningfulness of the poetry. All right. So Brooks studies about paradox in his 2 works. Number 1 is in Wordsworth's composed upon Westminster's Bridge. In this work, he says the speaker can appreciate the industrialized London just as he appreciates any natural phenomenon. What does he say in Westminster's Bridge? He says that a speaker can appreciate any industrial phenomena. For example, any phenomena that has occurred during the period of industrialization, the speaker can appreciate it just as he appreciates any natural phenomena, because he says that London is part of nature which is built by man, who is also a part of nature. Understood? London is a part of nature, and man who built London is also a part of nature. So inevitably the industrialization and all of its results would also be part of nature. All right. So if you appreciate nature, one must appreciate all of these things. Got it? And then in the second book, he talks about Donne's canonization. All right. And wherein he says there is a paradox being used as an underlying metaphor, as the speaker describes his physical love as saintly. For example, saints don't follow physical love. They don't fall in love. Saints, they keep away from all the physical needs, physical things that are attributed to the physical life of human beings. They take up the saintly life, and there is no aspect of physical love for them. And he says that after the lover's death, they would be canonized. They only canonize saints. And here it is a metaphor used in a very paradoxical sense, that saying that saints, even the lovers who are not saints, can be canonized. All right. Also just because of their love. He says that their love is saintly. And this very sentence is very paradoxical in nature, because saints do not follow love. I mean, physical nature of love. All right. So he says that love and religion here are intertwined. All right. He intertwines the physical nature of love and intertwines the spiritual nature of religion. And he says that the lovers are going to be canonized just because of the noble nature of their physical love. All right. These are the 2 books wherein he discussed about the paradox. And then the second feature is heresy of paraphrase. All right. There is something more to paradox we would be discussing in the later part of this video, but the second concept is heresy of paraphrase. All right. First of all, what is paraphrasing means? Paraphrasing is summarizing something. If we see, we cannot read, if there is a wasteland, if there is a work wasteland, it is a very long poem. People say that as this is a very long poem, one cannot always read the poem. So we would summarize the poem and just follow it and follow the meaning in it. All right. but that is a very injustice being done to the poem, because when you don't read the poem and just jump right into the summary of the poem, you are just not understanding or giving any value to the artistic nature of the poem. All right, you're just going to get the sense of, oh, okay, this is what the speaker says, but those words are not what the poet says. Those words are the words of the one who paraphrased it. All right, that is the meaning of it, but where is the artistic value, and where is the form of the poem? You cannot condense a form of a poem to prose. All right, poetry can never be equated with prose. Poetry becomes poetry because of its, you know, uh, because of its mixture of form and content. All right, so heresy means a mistake or committing error. So what does heresy of paraphrase means? You are committing a mistake by summarizing something. So as new criticism is especially about poetry, this entire concept is also taken in relation to poetry, but that does not mean that it can never be applied to prose, but this is predominantly towards poetry. So in well-wrought urn, the term heresy of paraphrase is discussed. Okay, and paraphrasing is just giving the essence of the poetry. Okay, when you just give the essence of the poetry, where is the entire thing that has been discussed in the poetry, the value of it is lost, completely lost. As I've already told you, when you summarize something, the value of the work is lost. Summary gives plot of the work, but the artistic value of the work is totally lost. That's what I've discussed earlier. Words used by the one who paraphrases any work would belong to him, but not to the artist whose work is being paraphrased. For example, we have many websites paraphrasing many greater works of our literature. For example, if you take Cliff Notes or something like that, that would belong to the one, if you take the summary of Wasteland from Cliff Notes, that would belong to the one who wrote the summary, but not to the author who, no, not to the poet who has written it. Not, it does not belong to T.S. Eliot. All right, if you read the entire poem only, is when you understand the entire complexity of that thought and complexity of the entire poem, complexity of its theme, complexity of its form, complexity of its content can be understood when you read the entire poem. All right, simply put, it does not have anything to do with original text. When you read the summarized version, you are reading the summarized version, but not the original version. So you have never read the original text. A poem cannot be summarized into a poem. The form is what makes it a poem. All right. And then he also talks about unity and organic wholeness. Okay, wherein he argues that the successful literary work achieves a sense of wholeness where every element contributes to the total effect. If you remember, this is what I.A. Richards says. There are 4 kinds of meanings. 4 kinds of meaning. By I.A. Richards. If you haven't read this concept, I have made a video on I.A. Richards and his concept, so please go and watch it so that you can understand what I'm talking about. So those 4 kinds of meanings are sense, feeling, tone, and intention. All right, so he says that when you observe the entire concept as a whole is when you understand every element that contributes to its total effect. All right, I.A. Richards says that a total meaning is a blend of all these 4 kinds of meaning. That's what even Cleanth Brooks says: organic, wholeness, and unity. Okay, this idea rejects separation from form and content. See, that's what we discussed. I've told you. For example, if you take a page of poetry, it would be written like this. Okay, it would be written like this, in this way. And if you take a page of prose, it would be written like this. All right. So even the form of poetry and prose is completely different. So how can you turn poetry, which is in this form, to make it look like this, even when its content is also being, disintegrated and not to its full, the entire complexity of the poem is very much disintegrated, and it is completely lost. The artistic value is also completely lost. Also, he says a true poem is a simulacrum of reality and experience. What does simulacrum says? Simulacrum is a concept of Baudrillard. We would be discussing it in later chapters as well. But he says, but in simpler words, simulacrum means real life like. What does what is something that is lifelike? It's a copy, right? So simulacrum is a copy of reality. Sorry, simulacrum means a copy of reality. Okay, he says that a true poem is a copy of reality and experience rather than any mere abstraction from experience. He says that a true poem is a copy of reality and experiences, but it cannot take some simple abstracts of the experience cannot be taken. Entire whole experience should be taken. Only then a true poem can be made. That is what Cleanth Brooks says. All right. And then, as I've told you that there is something about paradox that we can discuss later. R.S. Crane is a main proponent of new Aristotelian theory. We would be discussing that later as well. He wrote about Cleanth Brooks in his essay called Critical Monoism of Cleanth Brooks. Monoism. What does monoism mean? For example, in religion, monoism means worshipping one God. All right. So, what does one God has to do with Cleanth Brooks? If you ask, he says that he worships the concept of a single concept, like he worships God. So that's what he's trying to tell with this title of the essay, Critical Monoism of Cleanth Brooks. What does the one concept that he worships? He talks a lot about paradox. In fact, he overrates the concept of paradox. That's what Crane says. He argues that Brooks emphasizes a lot about paradox, so that the other important parts of poetry, such as imagination, which are actually critical to poetry, are actually undervalued. So when you give importance to one certain thing, the value of other things which are equally important to this poetry are lost, because you are not even giving a glance to that factor, right? So if you always stress on the paradoxical nature of poetry, the other important factors of poetry are completely lost, which are very much essential to enhance the beauty of the poetry, right? Crane also goes on to say that due to Brooks' overemphasis of paradox in poetry, he's ignoring the importance it in everyday conversations. For example, he says that paradox is very important to poetry, very important to poetry. Paradox is equally important to everyday conversations. That's what R.S. Crane says. You are saying that it is also only important to poetry and poetry, but it is very much important to everyday conversations as well. All right, these are the two kinds of attacks kind of thing R.S. Crane puts on Cleanth Brooks. The first one is there are other important things to poetry as well as paradox, right? And then he also says paradox is equally important to real life, along with real life conversations, along with poems. All right. So I think I've completely able to cover every term concept related to Cleanth Brooks. And if there is anything you would want to know about Cleanth Brooks, please let me know in the comment section, so I can read them and I can understand these concepts and get them to you in a much better way. So I hope you understand everything. I will also let you take the screenshot of this notes, so you can use it in your own notes. And also please make sure to take a running notes while you are listening to whatever the class you are listening to, so that you could always refer back to it. All right. If you also want to know the journey of my JRF or my net or the examinations I've cracked so far, please let me know. I would also make separate video dedicating to that. All right. So yeah, that's it for this video. Please make sure that you subscribe and also like this video and comment down below. Thank you.